Ladies and gentlemen, the Alabama Senate will now come to order. Our prayer today will be delivered by Senator Chris Elliott. Senator Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today is Ash Wednesday, the beginning of Lent, a solemn time in the liturgical year where Christians repent and fast to commemorate the 40 days that Jesus Christ spent fasting in the desert and enduring temptation by Satan. The Lord be with you. Almighty and everlasting God, you hate nothing you have made and forgive the sins of all who are penitent. Create and make in us new and contrite hearts, that we, worthily lamenting our sins and acknowledging our wretchedness, may obtain of you, the God of all mercy, perfect remission and forgiveness. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
Thanks, Senator Elliott. Today the pledge will be led by Luke Menon from Hartselle, Alabama. Luke is paging for Senator Orr.
Attention, salute, pledge.
Thank you. Secretary, call the roll.
Mr. Albritton, Mr. Allen, Mr. Barfoot, Mr. Beasley, Mr. Bell, Mr. Butler, Mr. Carnley, Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Chasteen, Ms. Coleman, Ms. Coleman-Madison, Mr. Elliott, Ms. Figures, Mr. Gavan, Mr. Gudger, Mr. Hatcher, Mr. Hovey, Mr. Jones, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kitchens, Mr. Livingston, Mr. Milson, Mr. Orr, Mr. Price, Mr. Reed, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Sessions, Mr. Shelnut, Mr. Singleton, Mr. Smitherman, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Stutz, Mr. Wagner, Ms. Weaver, Mr. Williams.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have 25 senators present, which is a quorum, and the Senate is ready to transact business.
Mr. President.
Senator Wagner.
Move that we excuse absent senators.
All right, any objection? Hearing none, so ordered.
Mr. President.
Senator Wagner.
Move that we dispense with the reading of the journal from the previous legislative day and that we adopt said journal.
All right, any objection? Hearing none, so ordered.
Mr. President.
Senator Wagner.
Move that we allow committee reports anytime during the day.
All right, any objection? Hearing none, so ordered. All right, now move on to introduction of bills. Senator, do you want to?
I will. Mr. President.
Senator Smitherman.
I make a motion that bills can be introduced any time during the day.
All right, any objection? All right, hearing none, so ordered. You need to be recognized for a point of personal privilege.
Yes, sir.
You're recognized.
Thank you. Colleagues, today we have our moment in Black history. Today we're going to share with you about the guilt of Gee's Bend. Who represents Gee's Bend in here? Okay, we're talking about the guilt of Gee's Bend. The guilts of Gee's Bend are among the most important African American visual and cultural contributions to the history of art within the United States. Alonzo Pettaway, Annie Mae Young, and Mary Lee Bendorf are among some of the most notable guilters from Gee's Bend. Just southwest of Selma, in the Black Belt of Alabama, Gee's Bend, officially called Borken, is an isolated rural community of about 700 inhabitants. The area is named after Joseph Gee, a landowner who came from North Carolina and established a cotton plantation in 1816 with his 17 slaves. In 1845, the plantation was sold to Mark H. Pettaway. Many members of the community still carry the name. After emancipation, many freed slaves and family members stayed on the plantation as sharecroppers. In the 1930s, G's Bend saw a significant shift in their community as a merchant who had given credit to the family of the Bend died. And the family of this merchant collected on debts owed to him in very brutal fashion. These indebted families watched as their food, animals, tools, and seeds were taken away, and the community was saved by the distribution of Red Cross rationings. Much of the land of this area was sold to the federal government and the Farm Security Administration, and those organizations set up G's Bend Farms, Inc., a pilot project that was a cooperative-based program intended to help sustain the inhabitants of the area. The government sold tracts of land to the family of the Bends through the Native and African American population control over the land, which at the time was still rare. In 2003, 50 guild makers founded the G's Bend Collective, which is owned and operated by the women of G's Bend. Every quilt sold by the G's Bend Quilt Collective is unique and individually produced. In recent years, members of the collective have traveled nationwide to talk about G's Bend's history and their art. Many of the ladies have become well known for their wit, engaging personality, and in some cases, singing abilities. In 2011, the G's Bend quilters were featured in the episode G's Bend, the most famous quilts in America, which was part of 5 of a 9-part series titled Why Quilts Matter: History, Art, and Politics. In 2015, G's Bend quilters Mary Lee Rudolph, Lucy Mingo, and Loretta Pettaway were joint recipients of the National Heritage Fellowship Award by the National Endowment for the Arts, which is the United States' highest honor in the folk and traditional arts. Thank you all very much for allowing me to share our day and moment in Black history. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Smitherman. All right, now move on to committee reports.
Mr. President, make a motion to receive these anytime throughout the day.
We've already got that, and bills too. Senator Smitherman beat you to it. All right, committee reports. The secretary called the first committee.
From the Committee on Finance and Taxation Education, Senate Bill number 62 receives a favorable report with one amendment by a vote of 16 ayes and 0 nays.
This bill has received a second reading to be placed on the calendar for next legislative day. Secretary, call the next committee.
From Finance and Taxation General Fund, Senate Bill number 83 receives a favorable report by a vote of 14 ayes and 0 nays. From the Committee on Finance and Taxation General Fund, Senate Bill number 84 receives a favorable report by a vote of 14 ayes and 0 nays.
These bills received a second reading to be placed on the calendar for next legislative day. Secretary, call the next committee.
From the Committee on State Governmental Affairs, Senate Bill number 55 receives a favorable report by a vote of 8 ayes and 0 nays.
This bill has received a second reading to be placed on the calendar for next legislative day. Secretary, call the next committee.
From the Committee on Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, Senate Bill number 23 receives a favorable report with substitute by a vote of 12 ayes and 0 nays.
This bill received a second reading to be placed on the calendar for next legislative day. This concludes committee reports. Now move on to motions and resolutions. Any motions or resolutions? All right, no local bills, so Senator Wagner.
Mr. President,
Senator
I
Wagner.
have a report from the Committee on Rules.
All right, Secretary Reed received the report from the Committee on Rules.
From the Committee on Rules, Senate Resolution Number 14, Special Order Calendar. Be it resolved by the Senate of the Legislature of Alabama that immediately upon the adoption of this resolution, the following business in the order set forth below shall be the special and paramount order of business for the 5th legislative day, taking precedence over the regular order of business or any pending or unfinished business. On page 3 of the calendar, Senate Bill Number 77 by Senator Elliott relating to the Archives Department. On page 1, Senate Bill Number 10 by Senator Elliott relating to libraries.
Mr. President,
Senator Wagner.
move adoption of the report from the Committee on Rules using the short roll call.
All right, Secretary, call the long roll.
Mr. Albritton. Mr. Allen. Mr. Barfoot. Mr. Beasley. Mr. Bell. Mr. Butler. Mr. Carnley. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Chasteen. Ms. Coleman. Ms. Coleman Madison. Mr. Elliott. Ms. Figures. Mr. Gavan. Mr. Gudger. Mr. Hatcher. Mr. Hovey. Mr. Jones. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kitchens. Mr. Livingston. Mr. Melson. Mr. Orr. Mr. Price. Mr. Reed. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Shelnut. Mr. Singleton. Mr. Smitherman. Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stutz. Mr. Wagner. Ms. Weaver. Mr. Williams.
"24 ayes, 4 nays. The special order calendar is adopted." All right, Senator Singleton, you want to move for final passage? Secretary, call the bill.
On page 3 of the calendar,
Postpone it indefinitely.
Senate Bill Number 77 by Senator Elliott relating to the Archives Department. BR pending.
All right, Senator Singleton. I'm sorry, Senator Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thought Senator Crossaway was going to move the BIR using previous role without objection.
No, sir.
Okay, Mr. President.
No, sir. Now I could go and talk to 20 minutes, or you can, to 10 minutes, or you can explain what you're doing here.
I'll be happy to.
Thank you.
Mr. President, this bill deals with the Alabama Department of Archives and History. Currently, that board's made up of 16 members, with the governor serving as an ex officio member of that board. But the board is self-perpetuating, which means that it just appoints itself over and over again or chooses its own successor. And so what we've done here is come up with a way to get away with that, or get away from that, and put us in a situation where the board is responsible to elected officials who are then responsible to the people of the state of Alabama. We don't need to have a board that doesn't have any accountability to the people of the state. And so what we've simply done here is change the appointing authority of the board itself.
All right, thanks, Senator Elliott. All right, Senator Singleton.
Yeah, Mr. President, thank you, Mr. President. Senator, thank you. And I understand where you're going in with this, but 6 months ago we had no problem with this. So let's just talk about what brought this on for real, why you're bringing this on. Let's just talk about the 800-pound gorilla that's in the room, okay? Let's deal with that, because, you know, I don't want it to slide by that we just reappoint a self-perpetuating board. It's not that simple, all right? We're talking about issues based on something that happened over there that by virtue of that board, it wasn't their fault. They was basically adhering to a third-party outside organization with a grant, to my understanding, that came in and did, you know, some history, which archives in history is where it should happen. They didn't do it, you know, at the Rotary Club. They didn't do it, you know, somewhere over at the public library. You got a library bill coming up next. They didn't do it in a school somewhere. They did it where history is made, where history is recorded, and history is what we depend on our archives and history, so that generations of generations of generations will be able to look back in our history as we go. One day you and I are going to be dead and gone, and people are going to read about you and I. Our names will forever be etched in history somewhere associated with this state. And people are going to talk about it. Old Bobby Singleton, they used to get up to that mic with he and Elliott and how they used to have a good time. People would talk about us. Our names are being etched. These pictures on the wall will forever be around. Somewhere in history, we will be a product of that Alabama children. Somebody gonna one day say, my great, 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 great granddaddy was Senator Elliott, okay? And so they would know that. But without history, they wouldn't know that. If it wasn't recorded, they wouldn't know that. They wouldn't understand the essence of what it is. So it's not a choice. They don't care nothing about whether Elliott was a good guy or a bad guy. People would do that research for themselves. Nobody's going to make a judgment on who you are as to whether or not we're going to put you in history or not. So because people choose lifestyles, we shouldn't judge them based on what that is, whether or not history should record that or not, if that is what history records. And let people choose themselves as to whether or not they want to read that, understand that, and know about that. That's what history. I don't care nothing about the history of the Ku Klux Klan and how they hung black folk. I don't care nothing about that history, but I read it. Okay, I understand that it's history. It happened. Okay, it happened. There are people who don't care to know about Bobby Singleton, but guess what? It will be history. It happened. So we can't stop events from happening that was called history. And so whatever happened over there on that particular day, we don't know what happened 10 months from there ahead of that. We don't know, but it was just that one thing that sparked you. And one thing that sparked you, that got us in this pickle that we're in now. And that's okay. That's why we are who we are. There ain't but 35 people who are going to be able in the history to say that they're senators during this time. Because you know what one of my mottos is? There ain't no better time than right now. I don't know a better time than right now. Okay? So while you and I are standing here, we're making history. The general is recording us now. Somebody might want to come back, because if we object to what Senator Wagner come up here and said he want to suspend the general for reading for the previous day, we would have to listen to the general if one of us object. That's another tool I could use now, okay? And so that's the history of what we did the day before. And that journal will forever be recorded. These ladies and gentlemen here are recording history as we go through right now. Every time they write something down, and I love the way they do it, they still do it with pencils. I love it. They still do it by hand. But it's a journal, and it will be forever recorded. And somebody gonna hear it, and somebody won't hear it. Somebody ain't gonna care nothing about it, and others will. So why can't we allow that history be given to those who care about it? We just can't dictate. It's just like your next bill gonna be, you give folks school choice, but then we're gonna want to take away the choice of them to be able to read what they want to read when they get to the library. You see, government can't have it both ways, dude. You know, this is what we're doing. It's almost borderline hypocritical. I would never call you a hypocrite. You my friend, okay? But I'm saying we can't be on an emotional ride here because of something that we may not want somebody to know about. Somebody else may want to know that because it's history. Somebody else may want to know that. And we can't, we're not the only people in this world, in the state of Alabama, and we get to choose what other folks do. Then you're talking about big government. Now you're talking about government interference. Now you're talking about censorship. Now you're talking about what people should, can, or cannot hear, read, write, or whatever they can do just because we have the power to do it. I think that we're promoting power that we really have. I won't say that we don't have. Collectively, together, we're going to push this bill out because it takes all of us to vote on it, one way or the other. And that power is being used, I think, at this point, unnecessarily. Because I don't think the board itself did anything wrong, even if they are self-perpetuating. And see, that's where you dug your line in the sand. You didn't want to come out and talk about what it really was. You want to put your line in the sand on the board. It's not going to change the next board, whether the Senate confirm them or not. Because when they do it, we just can't get rid of them like all of them right then and there. It would have already happened. It becomes history. And we just can't go back and say, scratch that out. Take that away. You know, it's not like playing football and the referee throw a flag and say, oh, well, I'm going to pick that up. It's not a penalty. That would be history. And that third-party group that came in and talk about LGBTQXYZ, the rights of them and the history of LGBTQ in this state, that's my understanding of it, that they came to talk to them, and it was a grant given by someone else. A third party outside came to this board. The board didn't institute that. They didn't initiate that. But we're ready to punish this board to the extent that we want to dig in on the self-perpetuating board instead of really dealing with the real issue here. And I think that that's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Okay? And let's just call a spade and be transparent about it. Okay? That's what I really would love for you to stand up here. Because when you just explained what's in the bill, you didn't talk about that at all.
Senator Singleton.
Yes.
The time's expired on the BIR.
I'll be back at you.
All right.
Mr. President, move we adopt the BIR using the long roll.
All right.
Please, long roll.
Secretary, call the long roll.
Mr. Albritton. Mr. Allen. Mr. Barfoot. Mr. Beasley. Mr. Bell. Mr. Butler. Mr. Carnley. Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Chasteen, Ms. Coleman, Ms. Coleman Madison, Mr. Elliott, Ms. Figures, Mr. Gavan, Mr. Gudger, Mr. Hatcher, Mr. Hovey, Mr. Jones, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kitchens, Mr. Livingston, Mr. Melson, Mr. Orr, Mr. Price, Mr. Reed, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Sessions, Mr. Shillnut, Mr. Singleton, Mr. Smitherman, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Stutz, Mr. Wagner, Ms. Weaver, Mr. Williams,
25 ayes, 4 nays. The BR is adopted. Secretary, call the bill.
On page 3 of the calendar, Senate Bill number 77 by Senator Elliott relating to the Department of Archives and History. Committee amendment pending.
All right, Senator Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. President. So my colleague, during our conversation about during the BIR, wanted to talk a little bit more about the history and why we're talking about this bill. And I'm going to oblige him because I think it's fair to do that. A couple of months ago, back in the summer, I became aware of a program that was being presented at the Alabama Department of Archives and History. And a number of our colleagues in both the House and Senate were very concerned about the topic of the program. And I know you want to talk about it, and we're going to talk about it. And so we made some phone calls to the executive director of the Alabama Department of Archives and History and said that we as senators, we as House members were concerned about the topic and its place at Archives and History. And the director was kind enough to take our calls and then move right along with their programming. And so I think it is important for this body, for elected officials, to ensure that the bureaucrats in this state know that you're running this state and that I'm running this state, and that we have delegated authority to them to manage a certain part of it. But if they're not responsive to us, to you, to me, then they're not responsive to the people that we represent. And what we have is some folks over there who are in a situation where once every 6 years, just like a United States senator, they have to come back before this body and be confirmed. But that's the only time there's any accountability, the only time. Now, you bring up an interesting point that this program was not something that the board necessarily may have had particular knowledge of. They're still responsible for it. I'm sorry, at the end of the day, they're still responsible for it. You're responsible, I'm responsible, they're responsible. And when my constituents ask me, how did we get here? Why are we doing this? The answer has to be because you and I let it happen. Because you and I delegated our authority to somebody else, who then delegated that authority to somebody else who did stuff like this. And that's where it's our responsibility to get a hold of it. To get it back where you and I, where the lieutenant governor, the speaker of the House, and the pro tem are ultimately responsible for who sits on that board and who the executive director is, And when they've got programming that's objectionable to the people of the state of Alabama. And so let's talk about that.
Can we dialogue? Let's.
Yes, sir.
Right there.
Absolutely.
Interesting point that you made. That we get to control that. Now,
we're responsible to control that.
I just want to throw out to you that I'm often hearing from your side of the aisle the words government intrusion, big government, always got our hands on things. And now I hear you want to be big brother to oversee, because this is the problem with that. Just like you and your colleague, your friends who are other colleagues of ours, heard that and thought that they should have been responsive to you and probably should have cut that out. Well, tomorrow, Senator Smitherman and I will probably be at the next one. She at the next one. Therefore, they could never get anything done if they had to be responding, because each and every one of us can find something wrong with every subject matter that comes up over there.
So here's what gets me, though. Until recently, we haven't had this problem.
Again, you're right. It's just the subject matter is the problem. You don't know what has been going on over there. That probably could have been some things that have been going on over there that's much more detrimental than what that subject matter was.
You brought up history earlier, and I think it's important. And we talked about the good, and we talked about the bad.
Yes, sir. And the ugly.
And the ugly.
Yeah.
I didn't know I was already in it.
Because it's history.
It is history.
We've had some ugly history in this state.
But here's what's not relevant. What's not relevant is who somebody had sex with last night. That doesn't matter. Doesn't matter for you, doesn't matter for me. What matters is what we do, what we contribute to society. And I want to celebrate anybody that makes a contribution to society. You build a rocket ship and go to the moon? Absolutely. You serve in the Senate? I think we ought to do that. We ought to talk about you. We ought to celebrate you. Absolutely.
Even if they're gay?
Even if they're gay, but not because they are.
Well, so what's the difference?
It's not the thing that
What's the difference? It was history.
Talk about it, but talk about it in the sense, and this is it with the programming. This is it with the programming.
I'm listening.
The conversation was because. It was because they were. It was celebrating this other lifestyle. That's not it. That's not history. The history is what you've done, what you've accomplished. The archival documents ought not to be posters for drag shows. That's not an archival document that needs to be in our archives in history as a poster of a drag show. Come on. What needs to be talked about is the achievements we've made. What needs to be talked about is what we've done, regardless of whether we're black or white, regardless of whether we're male or female, and certainly regardless of who in the world we had sex with.
I think you're taking it and extending it to a level to where it wasn't even that.
You seen this stuff?
I haven't seen it.
You don't want to?
I do. See, I'm not afraid of my sexuality. I know I'm a boy child. Okay? I'm not afraid of who I am. I'm not homophobic like that. I'm not afraid of who I am.
And I'm not either. I just don't think it's the defining thing. It's not the thing that is historical. That's it. It can be, and also, it can be, Bobby did great things and he's black. Chris did great things and he's short. We can talk, it can be an other, but it ought not to be the thing. It ought not to be the focus.
But because Bobby did some great things, who say that these people didn't do great things? Okay? And I don't know. I didn't look at this. Maybe you need to share some of that with me, since you over there flipping through. Because I saw some people over here last night flipping through what they call data. Didn't even have no real data over there about voting, because we didn't have that in the state. And they were just flipping through papers. But all I'm saying to you is, it was a subject matter that got you to this point. Instead of instead of the board, then, if you're going to ban something, if you're going to say, well, then why don't you just do what you really want to do, is just ban that subject matter from being over at History and Archives. Because it has nothing to do with the board. You're taking it out on the board in spite of.
Because I don't want to micromanage that.
You're doing it now.
No, what I'm doing is this. Senator. I'm making sure that there's some accountability. Y'all go do you, but listen, when a senator picks up the phone and calls you, when a House member calls you, when they say, hey, there's serious concerns about this, I've got constituents that are bothered about this, are you really on the right track? Then they ought to take note of that, and they ought to listen to that, and they ought to have to because they're accountable.
But I'm also saying I could do the same thing about the next subject matter. I could find fault in it. I could feel like it has no place in history, and I could do the same thing, and they would never get anything done over there. And the next person can do the same thing, and we would just be perpetuating a cycle by which archives and history couldn't get anything done, even if, in fact, he makes the appointment.
You ever called over there and told them you had a problem with something they were doing?
No. Because I let history be history.
Till this, I didn't either.
I let history be history.
Till this, I didn't either.
I let history be history.
Me too. This isn't history.
I let history be history.
This isn't history. This is indoctrination.
I don't know. See, look here. I'm not going to argue the content, okay, because I don't know how it was presented and what content it was presented in. I hear you loud and clear, okay? I hear you loud and clear. But I don't know the content. All I am saying, I think that we're opening up a door and we're taking it to a point to where we're about to say to them is that because I call over there to you, you ought to respond to me. And you ought to hear what I'm saying because I'm big bad senator in this state. Okay? Hold up. I'm Mr. Senator, and you should listen to me and you should cut that out. Okay? Now here I come. Well, I'm Mr. Big Bad Senator, and I want you to keep it going, and you shouldn't cut it out. So where are we now? We're in a match. Because somebody could have called me and said, Senator Singleton, I got a call from Senator Elliott who thought that this was this, and I would call up and say, look, if he's calling us a senator, I'm calling us a senator too. Now, who should they listen to? Who should they listen to? Huh?
Under this bill.
Who should they listen to? You or me? Now they in a bind. That could easily happen. Can't you see that?
I can see that. I can also see that, as happened the other day, multiple people called from the House and the Senate.
I understand
expressing
that.
all
I'm saying, we're going to have multiple people call in their defense. But just because you call should not have made it something absolute because you are senator.
I think every bureaucrat in this state absolutely ought to be responsive to to you calling them.
Responsive to me, and they listen to you. You said it yourself. They gave you the meeting. He heard you.
And then moved
You
right
thought
on.
that he should have stopped because of you?
Because of a dozen different legislators.
And
yes.
a dozen, that doesn't mean, so a dozen of y'all supposed to have been right?
No. Postpone. Stop. Think about this. Is this where we need to be or not?
But that's whether I'm right or wrong. Why I got to second guess myself because you call. See, now you're trying to usurp a power, man. That's being intoxicated with power there.
No.
See, that's ooh, Lord.
It's our responsibility.
Ooh,
it is our responsibility.
I didn't know I had all that power. I've been not been using mine there, dude. Shoot, you're telling me something that I got. I didn't know I had, but I'm not that kind of guy.
It's your responsibility to use that power. You have it. You sit in that seat. You make those decisions. You make the laws of the state of Alabama.
Of course we do.
Every day.
And that's what we do.
The people that we represent.
So I'm going to call over there and tell Stephanie Azar, expand Medicaid, and you better do it.
Stephanie,
She's a bureaucrat.
she sure is.
I'm going to call the commission and say, expand Medicaid.
And you know what she's got? An appointing authority she works for.
Huh?
She's got an appointing authority.
But I'm going to call over there.
She's got the governor that she works for.
But still, I'm going to call over there because of my power and tell her you better expand Medicaid.
You need to make that argument with the governor. She's got an
I ain't
appointing
gonna do the
authority.
governor.
But what she
Hey,
doesn't
the governor
have...
appointed these folks.
What?
The governor appointed these folks.
No, they appoint themselves.
But the governor made their first initial appointment.
In 130 something.
It don't. No,
They've
it was
appointed
130.
themselves.
The governor made the initial appointment.
They appointed themselves.
She sits on the board with them.
She sits on the board.
All right then.
Well, you know what though?
All
With
I'm
no
saying
vote.
to you is this.
With no vote.
I'm gonna call Commissioner Azar and say I want you to expand Medicaid because I got that power.
The good news is, in that instance, there's actually an appointing authority that holds that commissioner accountable. Here,
Who is that?
the governor.
The governor.
And in this instance, there's no appointing authority that holds them accountable.
Well, speak real quick. Do y'all have time for us to recognize? I heard y'all speak about power. So there's a special guest we wanted to recognize in the gallery. Guest are Senator Jack Williams, the Commissioner of Agriculture, Rick Pate. If you could please stand. Good to have you today.
You think
All right.
we ought to give him an appointment?
He has an appointment on some stuff. He look over our foods. You don't get mad with folk who look over your food.
Senator, at the end of the day, I think that it's important for these folks to have some responsibility to an elected official who's responsible.
And I don't doubt you, but I don't doubt you if that is the road that we go down. I just don't like the road that you went down that rabbit hole about they should listen to what we say, because that's a dangerous road, man. That's a dangerous road that we can just go and if I knew that, I'd be calling some of these bureaucrats every day and tell them stop some of this mess they're doing.
When you're representing your folks, which I know you do, and you do it well.
But I represent my folks, but I respect their office. I respect who they are and where they are. Okay?
But at the end of the day, you make the law and you're the appropriator. And your people, the folks that you represent, they depend on you to be that guy. They elected you to do that job. It's ultimately our responsibility to make sure these folks are accountable to somebody. So let's make them accountable to our speaker. Let's make them accountable to our lieutenant governor. Let's make them accountable to our governor. Let's make them accountable to the pro tem.
But at the end of the day, in as much as all that accountability, let's make them accountable. That program could have still happened, and ain't nothing they could have done about it. You may remove me next week off the board, okay? But it still would have happened, and history still would have been recorded.
You are right.
That's all I'm trying to say. That's all I'm trying to say. Because what you're doing here doesn't stop anything.
But maybe it'll make them think.
About what?
About whether or not.
Because they're doing their job. So why should they walk around with a heavy hammer over their head every day, wondering if I got to tiptoe around whether if I do this, which senator or representative not gonna like it? Because any of the 140 of us would not like something.
I think the question comes back to, is it history? And I think that we can agree that the vast majority of what the Alabama Department of Archives and History is doing, and is doing well, is history. But
They
in this
do an
case,
awesome job at history.
and I would agree with you, except for in
They
this
do
case.
an awesome job.
And
at
in this
history,
case,
man.
I think they.
I love the programs that they put on. I love the things that they do over at Archives and History. They do an awesome job at history.
But at the end,
And I respect them to do that. There are some respectable people on there with impeccable records that is history themselves. There are people that are on that board that is walking history. Okay? I know one attorney on there, Attorney Fred Gray, is walking, living history himself.
you better believe it. And you know what's good about this bill is that he can be appointed, he can keep his spot, he is respected by every single appointing authority that's laid out in this bill, and he's gonna be reappointed.
And probably will. And let me just say this. While we're going through this, I won't call it an exercise. This this meaningful debate that you and I are having here. History will record it. It will probably be said that Bobby Singleton was over there standing up for gay rights. And you were against it. And that's not even what we're here doing. But that's what somebody will interpret based on what history, where it will be recorded 100 years from now. You see what I'm saying?
I do. And you and I both know it's not always recorded correctly, is it? Certainly not.
No.
Certainly not.
Sometimes it's not history, it's his story. Because as a people, I've been listening to your story a long time. So all I'm saying to you is that I think we jumped the gun on this one. But I'm going to be willing to work with you because I think you'll come up with some viable solutions. But at the end of the day, again, it doesn't stop what they're doing. But I don't want us to leave this body today with that feeling that we just should have that utopian authority to say to bureaucrats, as we would call them, just because I'm a senator, you shouldn't do that. I'm sorry, I'm not that kind of guy. I believe in respect for people. I believe that these people are there to serve because they didn't have to give their service to this state. Just like you don't, just like I don't. We could be doing something else. But we offer ourselves, and our people elected us to come to be their voices. And you're doing what you're supposed to do, is to voice, whether I agree or disagree. And at this moment, I disagree with that, okay? Just like on your next bill, I'm gonna disagree with the library, with telling folks in the library what they can post in the library. We want children to be at school, and in school they want to read, but then we want to be able to censor on the other side. It makes no sense to me. It just makes no sense. You can't have it every way you want it. You just can't. And so all I'm saying, and you probably will because you got the majority of the vote to do it. That doesn't make it right though. But you'll pass it. And a lot of times I know that we'll come back and we'll regret it. We'll regret it because my arguments in the next bill is going to be, what about that parent who want their children to read that book? You're taking their rights away from them. Just because we think it shouldn't be there, but some parent teaches their children what they want them to know. Some parents teach their children about being gay. Some children about, they give them the understanding of that. That don't telling them they can go do that, but giving them understanding. They tell them about the body. They don't talk about the body in the sense of little baby talk, but in natural science. You know what I'm saying? Talk to them to teach them what they need to know about who they are, so that they'll better understand who I am, and so I can express myself better, knowing who I am. Instead of me trying to put blinders over your head and tell them, wait till you get grown, and then they get grown and somebody in the world take advantage of them because they got shelter. So some parents don't mind exposing their children to what they feel that is the truth. Some of us don't want our children to know the truth until certain ages, okay? And that's a parent right to do that, all right? But that other parent who wants to expose their children, it's their right to do it also. Okay, so I think that we've trying to balance. There should be a balance here, because if you don't want, your child to go over there, just don't tell them don't go in that section of the library. I'm getting ahead of that bill. Let me stop on that because I'm gonna say that sermon for next bill. But I think that we're doing this board a disservice. We're saying to this board, we're punishing them for doing something we think they're wrong, and we want to go with the self-appointing on them simply because it's something that we don't like. This one instance that we didn't like, and they didn't listen to me when I said. That's what this is about. This is not about anything that board did wrong. This is not anything about the makeup of that board. This is not anything about recording history. I hear it now. As more you talk, it's about I called you. Me and my other friends and other members called you and you didn't do what we tell you to do. And now I'm hot. I'm going to put a bill in, and I'm going to make sure that y'all have to answer to somebody. That is wrong. I think that's misuse of our powers. As 35 members, out of 6 million people in this state, and but 35 of them can call themselves senators. That gives us a little juice. And with the authorities under the rules vested in us by the people of the state of Alabama, by the people of the state of Alabama. You know, we didn't just get here on our own, but those people make up this state is diverse. They're diverse in thought. They don't all think the way you think, you and your colleagues think. They don't all think the way me and my colleagues think, those who think like I do. Everybody have a different opinion about this. Again, we could have got into a match to where somebody could have called me from Archives and History, and I could have been saying, no, y'all go on. Then you and I would have been standing here just as we are now, assuming that we had that power just because of you, who you are, they should have listened to you. And I said, just because of who I am, they should have listened to me. And it never should come to that. It never should come to that. It never should come to that, because it wasn't the body of the whole telling them to stop. If you're going to say we as a senator, the body of the whole, now this is where you're finna make the body of the whole say you should stop. But you still are not going to stop what they did. You're still not going to stop the next subject matter. So the next time you feel like, so the next time I call you, then I'm going to call the light gov, then I'm going to call the gov, then I'm going to call the whomever. But guess what that is? That said that the power that you thought you had, you really didn't have it, because you got to call somebody else. That's what it really boils down to now. The power you saying that you have, for them to stop and give you that attention, that you got to call somebody else to make that happen for you. Somebody with a little more power than you. And so I don't think we should get in a power struggle here with those people who are serving for us. Those people come to serve on that board and give their time, their effort, and they give a lot of their time away from their families and whatever they do to come to that board meeting. And do they get travel pay? Probably not. Probably not. I'm not sure. But even if they do, you look at the people who are on that board. With Fred Grace sitting there, for every hour he's sitting there, he could probably be making $1,200 an hour doing litigating the case. Okay? But he's not making any money sitting at that board. Okay? And so all I'm saying to you is, I think that this is not a real problem in the state. We take something that's really not a problem and make it a problem. And so I know you have some amendments. You have a sub that you have a committee amendment. Are you going to take that committee amendment, strike it down? You're going to take the committee amendment away, offer a sub.
We're going to, when the time's right, I'm going to move table the committee amendment, and then we'll take
All
another
right.
amendment.
I think I got the gentleman behind me because he served on the committee. I don't. He was in the debates with you on the committee.
Oh, I remember.
I'm winging it, okay? I'm winging it because, you know, I didn't read the article that came out, but I'm just standing up for what I think that is right, and I just don't want us to usurp our powers in this body because of people who serve for us and make them feel like they are inadequate and make them have to have fear in their heart that if they don't do something that we tell them to do, then they're not serving the state of Alabama adequately. That's all I want to stand here and say. Mr. President, I would like to yield the mic to the gentleman from Montgomery, if he so. Wait, is his mic? Okay.
All
right, that's fine.
Yield to
Yeah.
my colleague.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
You're recognized. Yep.
I just want to, and thank you to Leader Singleton. We always start these our time together, certainly with prayers. And I'm going to share something just very briefly because Senator Singleton has covered all of what I was going to share. And I think out of respect for the word that I'm about to share, I'd like for all of us to hear it. So, Mr. President, can I get the attention of our... If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I have a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understanding all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. And as for tongues, they will cease. And as for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part, but when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. For when I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part, then I will know fully, even as I have known fully. And now faith, hope, and love abide these things, and the greatest of these is love. Now some people may know where that comes from. It's 1 Corinthians in that 13th chapter. And the only thing I will say, because Senator Singleton has covered all of what I was going to say, is I hope we'll get to the day, and you know we've talked about this, when we will stop legislating our fears and our dislikes. Because what has been said already, we have its amazing board, archives existing over a century. And now we want to change that. And I didn't get the answer in the committee meeting, but I think you did. Thank you. You did share, very honestly, I think, with Senator Singleton in your discussion, what that really is for you. And what I am appealing to, not only with you, Senator Elliott, my friend, but for all of us in this body. I don't know how many people may have caught the latest news, but there are several people who have sustained gun wounds in Kansas City today, just an hour ago. People who came together simply to celebrate the Kansas City Chiefs. I have personally buried 3 relatives since January 27th, and another that will be coming in the next week. We don't have time for this. We didn't come, and I know the intentions, but here's the thing. I also know that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And the idea of us coming into this space to do the people's business, I love the discussion that took place between you and Senator Singleton around history. And I love it because what it does say is that while we do know that we have some ugly things going on in our history, I never taught any of my babies when we were dealing with Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Every one of those children knew that I was preparing them so that when we got to the N word, they didn't have to simply say the N word, they said it because I had already put the children in a position we're not going to sanitize this. Mark Twain was one of the greatest satirists ever. And we're not going to take away from the value of that book and what he's attempting to share simply because it makes us uncomfortable. There are many things that make me uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable when on last evening I'm walking down the street and someone who does not look like me moves in a different direction. Whether they did it because they saw me, a melanated brother, or not, the fact of the matter is, it may have made them uncomfortable. Well, I have to live with that. That's a part of our history. And I had young people I taught who are no longer walking this earth because people didn't like the fact that these young people who were born gay, people who were born bisexual, people who were born, whether it was transgender or whatever, these are people who belong to the state of Alabama's history. Period. Bayard Rustin was one of the greatest individuals to organize things for everybody, but especially Dr. King in the March on Washington. A gay black man. The idea is that particular text, and I'll end with this, it talks about love. He doesn't say it's easy. It is difficult. But what we have to learn to do, if we really do pray the prayers we pray, and I want to add in this by saying this, and it may sound incredibly arrogant, but I wonder sometimes when I walk in this chamber later, I walk in later because here's the thing, I do fear God. I fear God. And there are many instances when I wonder, as much as I care about and respect my brother and sisters in this chamber, what God are you praying to? Because the God I'm praying to is a God who loves when we talk about that and who recognizes all of the things that make me a flawed individual, utterly flawed, but yet loves me. Utterly flawed. A mother who, at the end of the day, when she was told, do you want to keep this child? But she makes a decision to keep me. Even when she knew the board of deacons at our home church were going to raise the question with her because she was got pregnant out of wedlock, to force her to apologize for conceiving me. But I'm standing here. And it's because of the power of loving and caring. So my friend, I'm hopeful again, because we've had this back and forth, and I thank you for accepting these things, because I do know we talk even not just here, but outside this chamber. I hope that, again, for all of us, we'll get to the place where we legislate the kinds of things that we know that is the reason we're here to do, not our fears, not our dislikes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Hatcher.
Mr. President, may I be recognized?
You are.
It's an honor to have a dialogue with the gentleman from Baldwin County. And I just want to talk about the merits of this legislation and just have a brief dialogue. Last week, and Leader Singleton mentioned this earlier during his debate, he mentioned Attorney Fred Gray, who is a board member, a longtime board member of this worthwhile board. And I had a conversation with him last week. He used his cell phone to call my cell phone last week at the age of 93 years old. And he expressed grave concern, not about this legislation, but a similar bill that you filed, SB 5. And, well, let me back up. I'm pretty sure everyone in this room knows who Attorney Fred Gray is. But if you don't, he's one of the reasons why I get the opportunity to be in the Senate today. He was one of the first black legislators since Reconstruction elected. And also, he litigated before federal court so the Selma to Montgomery March could occur. He was Rosa Parks. He served as counsel for Rosa Parks during the Montgomery bus boycott. And also I want to give credence to Mr. George Evans, the late mayor of Selma, Alabama, who was on the board of archives as well. And he served as the first black superintendent in Selma, Alabama, of Dallas County Schools. And I just wanted to share that I am the progeny of their sacrifices, and they are great Alabamians. I want to go back to our conversation with Attorney Gray, and he reminded me that the archives is not about making history, but it is about preserving history. And what we have is, in the makeup of this board, it works. It has been working. And this proposed legislation is an insult to all of those remarkable Alabamians who've served on this board, and they deserve better. I'm concerned about this legislation because of the geographical diversity that is the makeup. When you have, anytime where you have concentrated representation from all of the congressional districts, it makes up for a more diverse and inclusive board. And I appreciate that there's representation currently from every congressional district, because that's what makes this board a well-run institution. Anytime when you have board members that are appointed at large, it dilutes representation. And so that is key. That is why I do not support this legislation. No one knows the region better than the people who come from these different regions. And that's what makes the Department of Archives a credible and exemplary institution. And so, Mr. Elliott, I hope that you consider language in this legislation to bring back the congressional representation, because I think that is key to ensure that this board lives up to its continued worthwhile purpose. Thank you, and I yield.
All right, Senator Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to yield to my friend.
All right, Senator Smitherman.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator, for yielding. And you know, this yield has a revolver on it, so it's going to yield right back to you. So I didn't say that for your purpose. I said it for some of our colleagues' purposes, you know, because they see me with these tennis shoes on, and that's usually my signal. You know, I got them on, but they may be for a different reason. You know, this is Valentine's Day, and talk to me now. I've been running in the right direction. So, but I want to just say to you that I appreciate you sitting down with me, allow me to sit down with you and share some of the concerns and be able to possibly come to a mutual consensus of some things that we can try to do to make it a little better. You know, and so for that, I want to say that to you. You know, I do want to say this, though, if you don't mind, is that one of the things that I want everybody in here to, you can use what I'm saying, too, is that when you're presenting a resolution, I always said to people that this is my way of being able to record about you in the archives, and we talking to the people there in the history of the state of Alabama. So for the next nth time of life, if they put your name in there, that's going to come up all these things that about you, and you'll remain to be known for time to time. So if you're not saying that and sharing that with people when you're presenting resolutions, do that, because you don't know what that means to them, that it's not just a piece of paper that we're handling that looks beautiful, that they can put in their house or office or whatever, that says those nice things. They are part of history. in this state. And so I just wanted to give that little side note about those resolutions. Let me first give you hey, I'll say it the way I want everybody else to know that you've seen it, but I want to give you a copy. I would, if you are ready for me to, I'll wait a minute, let me take that back.
So Senator, I want to make sure my colleagues understand what we're doing here. It's always
Okay, you go right on.
always good to clue them in.
And I participate in with you.
And so, members, the intention here, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and many of my colleagues, as we have worked through this legislation and talked about the Alabama Department of Archives and History, the good it's doing, some areas where some of us think they need to be a little bit more guardrails. We've had some good conversation. There's a committee amendment that I'm going to move to table, and then we'll get on to that committee amendment, or excuse me, your amendment, Senator. The committee amendment that I'm going to move to table simply changed the number of appointees for the appointing authority. And then if I can go ahead and table that, then we'll go ahead and get on your amendment after that. So, Mr. President, this time I move that we table the committee amendment.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Committee amendment's tabled.
Okay. And then, members, what my colleague and I have talked about at length is really the importance and the purpose of this bill is to make sure there's some accountability still. But my colleague has brought up, and other colleagues as well, the importance of having a larger board, a board that can have subcommittees and fundraise and do things like that. And I've talked to former executive directors of Archives and History who are very well respected and who I respect as well. And so I think that's an important thing. We've talked about the need for diversity on the board, and that's a common theme in here, but one I completely agree with, and I think we need to do that as well. And we've talked about the need for some, oftentimes in government, you don't turn the ship overnight, right? You turn it a little bit at a time. So what Senator has brought here today is one that simply gives these appointing authorities the ability to make those appointments as these terms expire over time. And so, members, I think it's a worthwhile amendment. I think it makes the bill better. I think it addresses my concerns of a self-perpetuating board eventually, but also think that it protects some of the very good points that have been brought up. And I'd yield back to Senator to offer his amendment.
All right, Senator Smitherman.
I'd like to offer then.
All right, Secretary Reed, receive the amendment, please.
Amendment to Senate Bill number 77 by Senator Smitherman. Replace line 42 on page 2 with the following: 18 at-large members and the governor or his. Replace lines 50 through 55 on page 2 with the following: replace lines 64 through 66 on page 3 with the following: the appointing authority shall coordinate their appointments to assure the Board of Trustees is inclusive and reflects the racial, gender, geographic, urban, rural, and economic diversity of the state. Replace line 67 on page 3 with the following: on August 1st, 2024, the Speaker of the House of Representatives and the President pro tem of the Senate shall select one additional at-large member to serve a term of 6 years. Replace line 71 on page 3 with the following: authorities described in section 4163D and E shall fill all.
All right, Senator Smitherman.
Mr. President, I move adoption of the amendment.
All right, using long roll.
Previous roll.
All right.
Let's do long
roll?
Long roll.
Long roll then.
All right,
Long roll.
Secretary, call the long roll.
Good amendment.
Mr. Albritton. Mr. Allen. Mr. Barfoot. Mr. Beasley. Mr. Bell. Mr. Butler. Mr. Carnley. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Chasteen. Ms. Coleman. Ms. Coleman Madison. Mr. Elliott.
Aye.
Ms. Figures. Mr. Gavan. Mr. Gudger. Mr. Hatcher. Mr. Hovey. Mr. Jones. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kitchens. Mr. Livingston. Mr. Melson. Mr. Orr. Mr. Price. Mr. Reed. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Shelnut. Mr. Singleton. Mr. Smitherman.
Aye.
Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stutz. Mr. Wagner. Ms. Weaver. Mr. Williams.
At 32 ayes, 0 nays, the Senator Smitherman amendment's adopted.
Thank you, Senator. I turn it back over to you. Thank
All
you.
right, Senator Elliott.
Thank you, my colleague. I appreciate you working with me on this, and I think we're in a much better spot. Mr. President, at this point, I would like to move for. Okay.
Mr. President, may I be
Senator Figures, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Elliott, tell me again, what is the reason or the urgency for this board to be changed among all of the boards that we have across the state?
It's one of the very few that is self-perpetuating and appoints itself. All others have an appointing authority. And so this gives some measure of accountability. It is very different in the way it's appointed.
Well, what about the University of Alabama and how they appoint their board? They appoint themselves too.
They do, and this body has in its past and has the authority to inject someone different if they don't like the appointees that come over as suggestions. And that's happened in the past. Unfortunately, that's not the case with this board, so they're a little different.
But what was brought to your attention for the need to do this board?
It's one of the very few that is self-perpetuating.
I know that's what you said, but we have a number of boards that are self-perpetuating. Like I said, the University of Alabama, why haven't you brought one for them?
Again, that's different.
No, it's not. In fact, it's even greater and has more, I guess, potential to do whatever it is you may want to stop doing. But you decide to pick this board. And now from, hearsay is that you have other reasons for wanting to change this board. And I just want you to tell this body and tell the citizens of Alabama why you chose this board to change. I sat on the Sunset Committee, the committee that reviews all of the boards and licensure boards in the state that are under review by statute for those particular boards. And I don't know of any that has been changed just out of the blue without a reasoning in terms of the board not doing what it's supposed to do by statute or whatever. So I just want to know why you decide to change this one? Have they had some sort of problem? Have they had a lawsuit filed against them? What is the reason? Because I need to know that before I vote on this bill. I voted for the amendment because I'm always about diversity. And I'm glad that Senator Smitherman put the amendment on some language that I had developed years ago, that when you have various appointing authorities, that those authorities would collaborate with each other to make sure that the diversity for race, gender, and the geographical areas are taken into consideration. However, there's no reinforcement to make sure that that's going to be done. But just what was so egregious about this board that they did, or something happened to make you want to change the board makeup and how it was appointed?
Senator, we've had a lengthy discussion in the chamber today, and I'll just go back and say what I've said before. None of the boards that you mentioned on Sunset Committee are self-perpetuating. This is one of the few.
Hold on, I can't hear you. Hold on.
I'll talk louder. This is one of the very few self-perpetuating boards that you mentioned. All the Sunset Board, all the cosmetology board, all these other boards.
No, I didn't mention those. I just said the other self-perpetuating board that I could think of right away was the University of Alabama.
And I've explained to you that that's different than this. In this instance, it's self-perpetuating. There's very little accountability. They serve 6-year terms. What we're trying to do, and what what the gentleman from Jefferson County amendment does, is allow those terms to roll off as the terms expire, and then allow the appointing authority, just like in all the other boards across
all
the
of that, Senator. I understand all of that.
Okay.
But usually we don't change something unless we're making it better because of something negative that has happened before it. So I was just trying to find something that would make me vote for this bill. But apparently, is this the same kind of situation that you had last year with the Alabama High School Athletic Association and the bills that you introduced about that board? That there were some personal feelings involved about something, or something you didn't like that they did, so therefore you brought some legislation? In any event, Mr. President, you just answered my question, Senator. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, Senator Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move at this time for final passage as amended using the long roll.
All right, Secretary, call the long roll.
Mr. Albritton. Mr. Allen. Mr. Barfoot. Mr. Beasley. Mr. Bell. Mr. Butler. Mr. Carnley. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Chasteen. Ms. Coleman. Ms. Coleman-Madison. Mr. Elliott.
Aye.
Ms. Figures. Mr. Gavan. Mr. Gudger. Mr. Hatcher. Mr. Hovey. Mr. Jones. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kitchens. Mr. Livingston. Mr. Melson. Mr. Orr. Mr. Price. Mr. Reed. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Shelnut. Mr. Singleton. Mr. Smitherman. Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stutz. Mr. Wagner. Ms. Weaver. Mr. Williams.
$28 ayes, 5 nays. Senate Bill 77 passes. Thank you, Senator Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, point of personal privilege, please.
All right. Before you do that, do you mind if I recognize a special guest in the gallery? This is the guest of Senator Stewart, Ashley Stewart, which is his wife. If you could please stand. Welcome to the Alabama Senate.
Mr. President, I just received something on my phone that's kind of very disturbing about this bill here. It says that it was on someone's page. It says state-funded institutions are meant to reflect the will of the people, yet the Department of Archives and History has blatantly disregarded Alabama's long-standing commitment to preserving our history, instead promoted their own social agenda. The Department of Archives and History persists in using public funds to promote leftist agenda. If this is what this was all about, I asked that question. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Singleton. All right, Secretary, call the next bill on the calendar, please.
On page 1 of the calendar, Senate Bill number 10 by Senator Elliott relating to libraries. BR pending.
All right, Senator Elliott.
Mr. President, this bill deals with local library boards and how the members are appointed and their appointing authority. The Rules Chairman, in his infinite wisdom, has seen the similarity between these two bills, so we don't have to talk about too much of it if y'all don't want to, because they're very similar. We've already talked about it. In this instance, local library boards are, once they're appointed, are not expressly allowed to be removed by the appointing authority. Now, here's the deal. In each municipality and each county, people are different. What they want is different. And I don't want us to be deciding what should be there or not be there, or who should be appointed or who should not be appointed. We ought to leave it up to the locals. We ought to leave it up to the city council people, and we ought to leave it up to the county commissioners that made the appointment to also be able to unmake the appointment. And that's just what this bill does. And I'd yield to my colleague.
Since can I be recognized? He yield.
You are recognized.
This is like a freeway. It's an open yield. So I just he's now I'm as I know this is not germane, but on your behalf you need some representation. And since I'm an attorney, I'm gonna represent you, even though you're an attorney. And I'm just gonna tell you why he said Happy Valentine. See, I told him to come up here, but he up there now, so he said that. So you remember that now. He said that. He wants you to know that. All right. But why? Let me ask you this: how were they appointed prior to now? And I just don't know.
So good question. As a former,
I mean, I know how mine, but yeah. Was it some, uniform that they all are done this way, and now we're doing something different? What are we doing different?
So, just like you, I wasn't aware of how they were all appointed statewide and why they weren't able to be removed by the appointing authority, which is kind of that accountability measure. And so I had a number of local elected officials, mayors and such, come to me and say, hey, we've got this board that we've appointed, but nowhere in the statute does it allow us to remove them if we don't like them. It's our authority that we've delegated. Again, same argument as before, right? It's our authority that we've delegated, the city council people have, for instance, to this library board. And we want to make sure that we ultimately retain that authority and that we have the ability to govern our own library if we need to. And so currently, once that appointment is made, depending on the locality, but for most of them, there's no mechanism to remove a library board member. So this just very simply says, hey, if you're a library board member, and every locality is different, and what every locality wants is different, but if you're a library board member, it isn't an appointment to a federal judgeship, okay? It's the library board. And the local authority that appointed you has the ability to remove you.
let me throw it. Now I want to, you know, I didn't mean to not recognize the fact that we have a lot of legal learned minds in here. You know, I'm looking at one. I'm looking at, I ain't gonna call that. I'm looking at one sitting down right back there. I'm looking around. Let me look around. I see one over here. I see several of them, and so I want to ask. I want to ask this question: is it anywhere in this bill that sets up the criteria for them to remove what they move them on? I mean, because right now, if there's no criteria, they just don't like somebody and they got a board of 9 and they get 4 more buddies, they just get him off. And that's not right neither.
So this came up in committee.
Good.
It was a good question that was asked by the lady from Jefferson and also my colleague, the whip here, about, listen, should we have to have a higher standard to remove somebody than appoint somebody? And so, again, bipartisan looked at this and said, yeah, we probably should. It needs to be a big deal. If somebody's done something wrong, it shouldn't be a simple majority. So I think you'll see an amendment coming on that requires a 2/3 vote to remove someone. But right now, there's no authority at all. They just do whatever they want to do, no authority.
But can you do this, though? In that, I like the vote part, okay? But there's got to be, let me back up. The constitutional law professor, or the retired one, in me, tells me that we need a uniform standard. If we're gonna make a bill that uniformly changes the process for everybody, because that's what we're doing, which it's nothing about you when I say this, but I don't really like that because, you know, we need to give more home rule. We taking home rule away from them by changing it. I know we're not changing that they can get rid of them, but they ain't come ask me to change it. You know, I probably represent one of the largest library systems in a municipality in the whole state. And nobody has come and told me that. I want to say this to you. I represent 2 of the municipalities that I represent in conjunction with the rules chair, that the majority of citizens in that are probably registered in the party with the rules chair, even though I'm their senator, you know, and but not one of them. You see understand what I'm saying? Party that made no difference. Not a one. I've had one of them in my office this morning, who lives, he'll know what I'm talking about, who lives in West Oxmoor, Homewood. You know what I'm talking about. She talked about a lot of things, but she ain't talking about this. So I'm making a point to say that I had nobody on either side of the political structure, any one of the municipalities, and they come to me and concerned about their library boards, whatever. So now, having said that, we need, I think, what you got, the majority, you know, number, but we also need some standards of review. You know, it's kind of like the lady said, and she gonna be surprised I'm saying this. She ain't up there, I don't think, but she gonna be surprised I'm saying this because when I say it, it's kind of like the lady when we were dealing with the choice thing from the board. You know, if you were there, she was right. You got to have the same standards. If you're gonna tell me I'm doing bad, but you doing good, and you set the scores and the criteria to determine whether you doing good, and then I got to take another one and be measured, and yet both of us gonna be evaluated the same, but on different evaluating scales. That's not equal protection. You treat one different than the other. So in this situation, that's what, if we don't set some kind of language, I'm not saying if you put 4 books in versus 3 books, if you put the wrong book right, that kind of, no, I'm saying it's got to be for cause. It's got to be that they went out there and did something terribly whatever it is, whatever cause we, but it has to be for cause, not just because they don't like them. And right now, the criteria that if they don't like somebody, and I always have to tell people that and I'm serious when I say this, I'm not trying to be facetious. If you were the judge for all people, we set up a court. And we can do it in here, by the way. We set up a court and make you the judge. We don't make it required. There has to be no lawyer then, like we do some probating rule. And set you up judge. They have to come before you to show what was happening and why. Then that's fine. Okay? Because I think you make a strict effort to be consistent in everything else. But we got some folks out there, and I know, they got personal biases, just period. I don't even want to talk about what those are, but they got personal biases, and they don't have the ability to set their biases aside so that they can look at whatever's there. We are saying that they even gonna set criteria. Some of them don't have, they can't do that because the criteria they set is not gonna meet equal protection because they saying how they feel, but they're not setting what really.
Gentleman from Jefferson County, your time's expired on the BIR.
Oh, I thought we done passed the BIR. I thought we were talking about the bill. All right, go right on.
Mr. President, that's you.
Yes.
Go ahead. I move we adopt the BIR using the long roll.
On roll. Secretary, call the roll.
Mr. Albritton. Mr. Allen. Mr. Barfoot. Mr. Beasley. Mr. Bell. Mr. Butler. Mr. Conley. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Chasteen. Ms. Coleman. Ms. Coleman Madison. Mr. Elliott. Ms. Figures. Mr. Gavan. Mr. Gudger. Mr. Hatcher. Mr. Hovey. Mr. Jones. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kitchens. Mr. Livingston. Mr. Melson. Mr. Orr. Mr. Price. Mr. Reed. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Shelnut. Mr. Singleton. Mr. Smitherman. Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stutz. Mr. Wagner. Ms. Weaver. Mr. Williams.
"24 ayes, 7 nays. The BR is adopted. Secretary, call the bill.
On page 1 of the calendar, Senate Bill number 10 by Senator Elliott relating to libraries. Committee amendment pending.
Mr. President.
Senator Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this point, I know there's another amendment coming, and I'd like to table the existing committee amendment if we can. And then if my colleagues agree, we'll go ahead and get on his amendment, and then we can keep. Well, let's get on his first if we can. Do you mind? And then come back. So, Mr. President, I'd like to move. Yes, I'm sure you do. I'd like to Move that we table the committee amendment, please.
All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The amendment's tabled.
Okay.
All right. Now, Senator Chambliss, you have an amendment?
Yes, sir, Mr. President.
All right. Secretary, read and receive the amendment.
Amendment to Senate Bill 10 by Senator Chambliss. Replace line 20 on page 1 with the following. Replace line 26 on page 1 with the following. Replace line 30 on page 2 with the following. Replace line 40 on page 2 with the following. By a 2/3 vote of the appointing authority. Replace lines 52 on page 2 with the following.
Senator Chambliss.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this amendment does two things primarily, very simply. The first is it raises the bar from a simple majority to a 2/3 vote. So anytime you're removing somebody from a position, it needs to be a little bit higher bar, in my opinion, than just a simple majority. So this would make it a 2/3 vote, and we deal with that in our body when we have serious subject matter. And then the second thing is there's a separate section in the code that deals with joint libraries, and this would make both of those codes have the same language. So with that, Mr. President, if there are no questions or opposition, I would move adoption of the amendment using the previous roll.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, so ordered.
Mr. Albritton. Mr. Williams.
24 ayes, 7 nays. The Senator Chambliss amendment is adopted. All right, Senator Smitherman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, I have an amendment.
All right, Secretary, read and receive the amendment, please.
Amendment to Senate Bill 10 by Senator Smitherman. Replace line 51 on page 2 with the following compensation.
There you go. You want to get it here?
You've submitted your amendment, so
Yeah, Senator Smitherman, you got
Okay.
it's all you.
Okay.
Yeah, you
All
got
right.
it.
All right, good.
On you.
I guess if nobody have any questions, then I move for passage of the amendment. And you can either use previous or long roll, either one. Long roll.
Long roll? All right, Secretary, call the long roll.
Mr. Albritton. Mr. Allen. Mr. Barfoot. Mr. Beasley. Mr. Bell. Mr. Butler. Mr. Carnley. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Chasteen. Ms. Coleman. Ms. Coleman-Madison. Mr. Elliott. Ms. Figures. Mr. Gavan. Mr. Gudger. Mr. Hatcher. Mr. Hovey. Mr. Jones. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kitchens. Mr. Livingston. Mr. Melson. Mr. Orr. Mr. Price. Mr. Reed. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Shelnut. Mr. Singleton. Aye. Mr. Smitherman.
Aye.
Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stutz. Mr. Wagner. Ms. Weaver. Mr. Williams.
$32 ayes, 0 nays. Senator Smitherman amendment's adopted.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, members.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Senator Singleton.
Yes, Mr. President. Here we go again. We sit up here and everybody dealing with boards. Let's you and I talk about what this is really about for real.
Local control.
It ain't really about local control. It's about what been in the news about the libraries, them taking books off the shelves, and you want to make sure that these libraries doing what they can do and probably putting them in a position. Is that correct?
I think locals ought to control what's in their local
I hear
library.
what you're saying, but is that not? We're talking about censoring books. They want to be able to take certain things off of books, certain books off the shelf. It's not about these libraries in control. It's about some parents or somebody got mad about what they thought, what they saw in books in the library. Then the library board got scared when the governor said something about it, and they decided to pull away from the Association of Libraries, which we get a lot of. Some of these small libraries get their funding from, they get periodicals from, and it's a big resource for them. And so now we're out here left alone, and they're really not going to get those resources anymore because they decided to pull away from the Library Association, which now I see that as a censorship. You want to censor what it is that we want. On one hand, you want school choice. You want parents to have the right to choose what they want. But on the other hand, you want us to be able to control what they read or do not read in that library.
I just want local.
I hear what you're saying, but let's call the 800-pound gorilla the 800-pound gorilla, because that's what the 800-pound gorilla is in this room. That's what it's all about. You weren't even thinking about this until that article came out or that news piece came out. You weren't even thinking about local library. Who thinks about local library? You probably give them some of your money every now and then. Do you give your money, school money, to some of your local libraries?
My great aunt was a librarian. I think about libraries all the time.
No, I mean, again, do you give them any of your discretionary money?
I'll have to go
You
back.
probably don't, see. You don't even think about giving libraries any money. So at the end of the day, I give my local libraries money all the time. Every time I get a little discretionary money, I give them some money. I still got a check for some of them right now because I think about them, because that's a resource for kids to be able to go to the library. Some of these kids, the only computer they can have is at the library. So let's just talk about what it really is. This is about censorship. This is about giving them that authority to sit in the library to be able to take down whatever books that they want to take out. That's what this is about. This ain't about libraries and giving them some authority. The same way we came down the line on the board with the archive. Here we are all again. You're crafty now. You're real crafty by being able to get a new headline without talking about what the headline really is. So I'm just going to sit it out there for what it really is. This is really not about just local control. You making it local control, because that's the way you can get around with it without dealing with the whole sensitive issue of censorship and choice. You want school choice on one hand, where we're going to have a bill with $100 million to give the schools to have a choice, for parents to have a choice to send their kids where they want. But them same kids can't go to the library and have a choice to read what they want. That's the problem here. So you want choice on one hand, and you want censorship on the other. This is not Nazi Germany or apartheid of South Africa. We should allow these kids to be able to read whatever those parents want them to read in the library. So what we're saying in the library, what y'all don't like, you go back on your shelves and take these periodicals down. Throw them away. That's what you're really saying to them. Because somebody don't like it. Because one parent decide they don't like what someone is going to read in a book. Here we go again. I'm just here to call the spade the spade. Everybody else can come up here and talk to you about what these boards does. I don't want to talk about these boards. I got a bill, I got an amendment that basically going to give some accountability to these boards if we're going to make them self-controlled. I want them to report back to us, like you just put that archive, report back to some authority. I want you to tell us in details everything that you're taking down. I want it in detail. And then I want you subject to the examiners and public accounts. since you want to be self-accounting. You want the local authority. So I want all of that to happen, since you just agreed on archive that we should have appointed authority around, and that we should be able to get a report from these libraries. And that's accountability. And I know you're not going to be against accountability. I hope nobody else in here will vote against accountability, because this is what I'm going to bring: 2 accountability amendments here. Because you want to be able to say these libraries want to get slick, and the Library Association want to pull away from the National Library Association because the governor said something. See, that's the power you were talking about, because once somebody called, that's what they should have did for you at Archive. They should have stopped. But when the governor said somebody, they want to pull away. They got chicken. They should have stood up and said, hey, we are about making sure that children get the best information that there is to possibly to give. It's information in a book. There's some stuff in books. I've been taught bad history all my life. I don't see books about African Americans who invented all the inventions that they made. They give them to some white inventor, which is a lie. You've been teaching me bad history all my life in books. Now you want to take down books that could be telling truths. Somebody gonna come with a CRT because they don't want me to talk about this up here like this here. Telling truths. So that's what you're gonna do. Say, I don't mind talking the truth. I speak truth to power. Since you got all that power over there, I'm gonna speak truth to power. I want you to understand that, because this is what this is really about. This is about censorship. This is about censorship. This is not Nazi Germany, where they're burning books in the streets. This is not about apartheid, where they made sure that certain families didn't have certain things they could read. If they got caught with certain readings, then they were put in jail. This is not slavery period, to where when families were caught reading the Bible sometime, their homes were burned. Free the books. Free the books. See, you going around the way of censorship. So then you can get in here and control and put your folks on who you want to put. They can put on the boards who they want to put on, so they can take down periodicals and things of that nature. They're taking resources from local libraries that we already don't do no major funding to. We don't do major funding to these local libraries. The little money they get, some of the resources was coming through the National Library Association. Now we want to take ourselves out of membership away from it because somebody said something about books that were there to some parent. Just because that parent didn't want their child to read, just tell your parent your child don't read books in that section. Because somebody else's child may want to read that book. Choice. The same choice, the $100 million we're going to be bringing here in the next couple of days, the $100 million choice, the $100 million plus, because that's the flow. It ain't the ceiling. It's not the ceiling. It's the flow of the $100 million, which is a tax credit. All these other tax credits, we've been capping them and sunsetting them, but this one we're not. It's going to be recurring over and over and over again. And then when we get broke, we're going to be still having to do that. See, we just running wild around here. You're supposed to be conservative. You talk about no big government, no government intrusion, and now you want to intrude in on education. You want to take public schools and make them a second choice. We act like private schools and these other schools is the thing. We don't know whether these private schools are even accredited, some of them are not, or whether or not they even educating kids at the level, because there's no balance of tests. We don't know what their test and their assessment goes. That's why we don't know. We could be running children into a bad school over there just because under the name of private. That don't mean that this is a good school. Private schools fail all the time. Charter schools fail all the time. We act like it's the new best thing since sliced cake. But then we're going to leave these kids in public school over here who don't have that choice, and then we front that bill. We're going to front that bill with a 300% poverty level, as if poor children got a choice somewhere they can go. Because guess what? In private school, they don't have free lunch. They don't have a lot of these disability programs, and they sure don't have transportation to send them over there. So that's just a facade to me to put that out front. Because ain't nobody gonna take advantage of that, because most of the poor folk who is set up to help can't go nowhere. But then on this hand, you want everybody to have this beautiful choice that you talked about today in committee. It's a beautiful thing. All these folk got to testify for it. It's a beautiful thing to have choice. But then on the other hand, you don't want these parents to have the same choice as to what their children can read. Oh, what a tangle web we weave. How hypocritical that is. And see, I have a problem with that when you try to cover it up under the auspices of the board. Let's just call a spade a spade. You play spade?
I don't.
Well, let's learn the game. Let's learn the game. Ace high. Let's call a spade a spade. Because this is not where we should be going in this state. And when we started doing that censorship, we're going to start doing more censorship. And we're going to censor a lot of other stuff because we're sending the wrong presidents here. They ain't about a board, mister. You fog in the air with a board. Everybody coming up here, we're trying to get some stuff on a board. When the real deal is about censorship. Come on, let's talk about that 800-pound gorilla. Just like when you indulged me on the archives.
So, Senator, this bill is about local control.
That's your truth, or you sticking to it?
Well, let me get into a little bit more detail here. Not much more, but a little bit. Every community is different. Every community is different. What's good in Orange Beach and what's good in Birmingham, what's good in Montgomery and what's good in Huntsville, it's just different. People are different all across the state. And all this does is give each individual appointing authority the ability to better control their library board. That's it. What might be good here, great. What people don't like there, fine. But it's just about local control. It's not big government, it's far from it. It's putting government right where it needs to be, back down there at those county commissioners and those city council people that we say, hey, y'all go run this operation.
Who's gonna replace the funding that they lose?
They won't lose any funding under this legislation.
I mean, because we'll pull away from the National Association, there was getting a lot of resources and funding from those grants and things of that nature from that organization.
But that's not what my bill is about.
I know, but you know that's your bill and telling what this is what your bill is dovetailing from that very instance of what happened. So you figured the way that I could better fix that is give local control. Let them appoint them. You wanted them to appoint the archive board. Let somebody else appoint them. Let the county commission appoint them. See, that's a local government there. Let's let the county commission appoint them.
So in the legislation, we are allowing the local folks, whether that's the county commission, as you point out, or the city council, appoint and remove board members. Local control.
My thing is this, guy. Let's just be real about this stuff, man. You know, we can sit here and just like you said, every place is different. It is different. Every parent is different in how they teach their children and what choices they want for their children. So this whole library thing is not about what you want is local control. It's really and truly about the censorship of these books. You want to make sure that these folks at that level can choose their folks who will go in there and pull out whatever books that they want to pull out. And that's what you really is getting at. So you may not know what my local library board is gonna do, but you hopefully that If they feel like something, they can go on and pull it if they want. Okay? I'm not going to prolong. I'm going to offer an amendment, all right, to where I want to be able to make sure that we get a little bit more transparency and that we get a little bit more accountability, all right? This first amendment is going to deal with the library board.
All right.
1 second. Yeah, this is one. Here we go. And then I can speak to it, okay? Once we get it up. And I just want, if we're going to do that, I want
Secretary, read and receive the amendment.
just a little bit more accountability.
Amendment 2, Senate Bill 10 by Senator Singleton. Replace line 50 on page 2 with the following. Each library board created pursuant to this section no later than December 31st shall provide annually to the governor, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and the President pro tem of the Senate a report detailing the membership of the board and any actions the board has taken regarding the review or removal of items in their collection during the previous 12 months. Members of the library board shall serve without.
All right, Senator Singleton.
So this is just a little bit more accountability based on you wanting us to be able to know what's going on. So while you want that local government to be able to appoint and do that local government, I want to know what they did because we have that power as you have given to us so eloquently in the last bill. Okay? I want to know what they're doing. I would like for it to be reported back to us what is being removed. So we just bringing it up the ladder just a little bit. We're not trying to appoint them. We're not trying to say who can or not. I just want a report from them. And I would like to call for the long roll on the amendment. Just a little bit more accountability.
All right, Secretary, call the long roll.
Mr. Albritton. Mr. Allen. Mr. Barfoot. Mr. Beasley. Mr. Bell.
That's the one right there.
Mr. Butler. Mr. Carnley. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Chasteen. Ms. Coleman. Ms. Coleman Madison. Mr. Elliott. Ms. Figures. Mr. Gavan. Mr. Gudger. Mr. Hatcher. Mr. Hovey. Mr. Jones. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kitchens. Mr. Livingston. Mr. Melson. Mr. Orr. Mr. Price. Mr. Reed. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Shelnut. Mr. Singleton. Mr. Smitherman. Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stutz. Mr. Wagner. Ms. Weaver. Mr. Williams.
28 ayes, 0 nays. Senator Singleton amendment's adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President. This second amendment, I think, Mr. President, I'm going to be hesitant. I'm going to withdraw because I think that at the end of the day, as we talk through it, they may fall under county and or city. And I don't know if they even get audited at this point, but they probably don't have enough money to even be audited anyway. It probably would take the public examiner more time, spend more money than the money that they would be auditing a public library. especially in some of these small rural communities. So I would not offer that one in that vein, but I appreciate you accepting the last amendment. But again, we can't go down this road of censorship. This is a bad road to go down, and that's what it actually ends up being at the end of the day. And so I'm not gonna prolong. I know today is Valentine, folks want to get out of here, and I'm not gonna try to wolf this or even try to force anybody into a closure. But I just want to say, again, for the record, this is censorship. This is not about a board. And we're just trying to make sure local folk can take out books. And as long as we got them having that accountability with to let us know what's being taken out, at least we can then see. Thank you. I appreciate you indulging us in this conversation this afternoon. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Senator Singleton.
Mr. President,
Senator Elliott.
move for final passage of SB 10 as amended using the long roll.
All right, Secretary, call the long roll.
Mr. Albritton. Mr. Allen. Mr. Barfoot. Mr. Beasley. Mr. Bill. Mr. Butler. Mr. Carnley. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Chasteen. Ms. Coleman. Ms. Coleman Madison. Mr. Elliott. Ms. Figures. Mr. Gavan. Mr. Gudger. Mr. Hatcher. Mr. Hovey. Mr. Jones. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kitchens. Mr. Livingston. Mr. Melson. Mr. Orr. Mr. Price. Mr. Reed. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Shelnut. Mr. Singleton. Mr. Smitherman. Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stutz. Mr. Wagner. Ms. Weaver. Mr. Williams.
(26 ayes, 7 nays). Senate Bill 10 passes amended. Thanks, Senator Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues.
All right, Senator Reed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank the ladies and gentlemen of the Senate body. Hard work today, a lot of important topics discussed. Thank you for your diligence always. We're going to be at it again tomorrow, 3-day week this week. So let me thank you for your diligence. With that, Mr. President, I'm going to make a motion that we adjourn until 10 a.m. in the morning, Thursday the 15th. Wishing everyone a happy Valentine's Day. Thank you so much.
All right, you heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? We stand adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. President.